I'm your host, BrightLearn, and today we're taking a journey through the stormy seas of global warming science, policy, and politics. We'll be exploring a fascinating book titled Taken by Storm: The Troubled Science, Policy, and Politics of Global Warming by Christopher Essex and Ross McKitrick. So, grab your raincoats and umbrellas, because we're about to get soaked in some eye-opening insights. Let's start with a bold claim. Global warming, as we've been led to believe, might not be the existential threat we've been told. Yes, you heard that right. The authors argue that the so-called consensus on global warming is more of a political construct than a scientific one. They challenge the idea that 97% of scientists agree on man-made global warming, revealing how this figure can be misleading and manipulated for political gain. Now, before you dismiss this as climate denial, let's dig deeper. The authors aren't saying climate change isn't happening. Instead, they're questioning the certainty with which it's often presented. They argue that the science of climate change is far from settled, and that the models used to predict future climate scenarios are riddled with uncertainties. One of the key points they make is about the concept of global temperature. They argue that there is no such thing as a single global temperature. Temperature is an intensive quantity, meaning it reflects the state of a physical system at a specific location, not something that can be measured globally with precision. The authors criticize the idea of averaging temperatures from around the world and calling it the global temperature, suggesting that this is a statistical manipulation that doesn't accurately represent the complex reality of climate. Let's talk about the famous hockey stick graph, which has become a symbol of the global warming movement. The authors dissect this graph, pointing out its flaws and the controversies surrounding its methodology. They argue that the graph relies heavily on proxy data, like tree rings, which can be influenced by many factors other than temperature. They also highlight the fact that the graph was constructed using statistical methods that some scientists argue are flawed. But the authors don't stop there. They delve into the world of climate models, those complex computer simulations that predict future climate scenarios. They argue that these models are not as reliable as many believe. For one, they point out that these models are based on assumptions and parameterizations that are not always grounded in solid physical theory. They also highlight the issue of subgrid scale phenomena, like thunderstorms, which are too small to be captured by the models, but can have significant impacts on the climate. The authors also discuss the role of aerosols, particularly those from sulfur dioxide emissions, in offsetting the warming effects of greenhouse gases. They argue that the cooling effect of aerosols has been underestimated, and that this could explain why the observed warming is less than what the models predict. But perhaps the most controversial part of the book is their critique of the Kyoto Protocol. They argue that the protocol is fundamentally flawed, and that it would have a negligible effect on global warming. They point out the economic costs of implementing the protocol, suggesting that these costs far outweigh any potential benefits. They also highlight the issue of hot air, where countries like Russia and Eastern Europe have emission permits to sell because their emissions have fallen due to economic collapse, not because of any climate policy. The authors propose a different approach to climate policy. They advocate for a focus on economic growth and adaptation. They argue that wealthy societies are better equipped to adapt to climate change, and that policies like the Kyoto Protocol divert resources from more pressing environmental and social issues. So what should we do about global warming? The authors suggest that we should take the concerns seriously enough to try and clarify the issue by posing some additional questions. How would we find out if human-caused climate change is true? Would it matter? Can we do anything about it? And would we want to, even if we could? They propose a new method for public study of global warming, based on a different way of thinking about how science and public policy should be related. They suggest forming two groups with equal funding and adequate membership in each. One group would make the strongest case for human-caused climate change, while the other would make the strongest case against it. The idea is to create a balanced debate and allow policymakers to make informed decisions based on a comprehensive understanding of the science. In conclusion, the authors remind us that life is too short to get overwrought about the panic of the day. While global warming is an important issue, it shouldn't consume us to the point where we forget the joys of life. They encourage us to think deeply and clearly about complex things, and not to let shapeless fears and phantom threats hold us back. So there you have it, folks. A whirlwind tour of the troubled science, policy, and politics of global warming. I hope this episode has given you some food for thought and inspired you to look beyond the headlines and dig deeper into the science. As always, thank you for tuning in to BrightLearn. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share this podcast with your friends. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, drop us a line on our social media channels. See you next time.
This has been a BrightLearn video from BrightLearn.ai on the book Taken by Storm: The Troubled Science, Policy and Politics of Global Warming by Christopher Essex and Ross McKitrick. Visit BrightLearn.ai for more fascinating videos like this one, and visit naturalnews.com for full editorial coverage and breaking news on critical stories that keep you informed and aware of what's really going on.